Venus, as represented in the primary horoscopes of various zodiacs, can be seen here. 3 different drawings of Venus are given for Brooks' zodiac, one for each of the 3 primary horoscopes of the zodiac. In the first, the name of Venus was written in Demotic script and interpreted by Brooks as Pei Nether Tau, or the morning star, Venus. In the 2 other horoscopes, Venus is represented as figures. In the horoscope with boats, the figure of Venus is easily recognizable. However, in the horoscope without rods, Venus looks rather odd for the Egyptian astronomical tradition. However, some of the distinctive Venus characteristics are present here as well. Here, one sees a fragment of the EB zodiac from the Greater Temple of Esna. In particular, we see Venus as 2 figures bearing rods, the female figure followed by the male figure with a leonine head. In front of Venus, we see Mars with a rod in his left hand and a whip in his right. If one is to approach the search of Venus in the Egyptian zodiacs sensibly, it presents us with a minimal number of problems. Indeed, Venus is the only female figure among all the planets. Another female planet, the Moon, was usually drawn as a circle or a crescent. It's impossible to confuse it with Venus. There shall be just one female planetary figure in the Egyptian zodiacs, as we are about to witness. We shall thus identify it as Venus. Computer calculations demonstrated this approach to have been correct. However, Heinrich Brooks made a grave mistake concerning Venus. Odd as it may seem, one still comes across this mistake as it is copied from study to study and appears in books written on the subject of the Egyptian zodiacs. However, as early as in the first half of the 20th century, Morozov pointed out Brooks' error and explained the reasons for its existence well enough. Those are as follows. When Brooks was deciphering the astronomical content of the round zodiac of Dendera, trying to estimate the position of Venus thereupon, he had for some reason completely disregarded the symbol consisting of 2 wayfaring women side by side, with planetary rods in their hands. However, it is the only female planetary symbol in the entire round zodiac. Instead, he suggested to use the male planetary figure with a double face, no less, the one that we see near Pisces in the round zodiac and in Aries in the long zodiac. Brooks was motivating this by his interpretation of the hieroglyphic inscription that he had found near this figure in the long zodiac, namely, God, or Goddess, of the morning. Apparently, he had been of the opinion that this inscription might only stand for Venus. Yet there is another astronomically valid version, Mercury. This fact was discovered by Morozov. The thing is, that Mercury is also an inside planet, just like Venus. Their inside disposition, as related to the Earth orbit, results in limited visibility of these planets from the Earth. One only sees them in the morning or in the evening, when the Sun isn't too far away from the line of the horizon. Mercury is closer to the Sun than Venus, and so, the name God of the Morning fits it even better. Furthermore, the Egyptologists are well aware of the fact that the name, morning star, could refer to both Venus and Mercury in the Egyptian inscriptions. However, there are far better planetary symbols for Venus in the Dendera zodiacs. Namely, the aforementioned pair of wayfaring women carrying rods in the round zodiac, and the girl with a rod accompanied by a male figure with a leonine head in the long zodiac. At any rate, Brooks' mistake with Venus became perfectly obvious after Morozov's research. And the constant recurrence of this mistake in the works of the Egyptologists is odd at the very least, if not to say suspicious. Thus, the astronomical ambiguity of Venus as an inside planet was reflected in the Egyptian zodiacs in the fact that it would be represented by a pair of planetary figures, 2 women or a man and a woman. One wonders how the Egyptologists explain the presence of a certain female planetary figure amidst the constellations, at a considerable distance from Mercury that they already identified as Venus? They are left with no opportunity of identifying it. Indeed, the real figure of Venus is obviously a problem. The learned scholars have no idea as to what to do with it and remain perfectly silent on the subject of the two female planetary figures that represent Venus. The stubborn silence of the Egyptologists regarding the true figure of Venus from the round zodiac indicates that they are apparently aware of Brooks' mistake. It becomes unclear what exactly might preclude them from correcting Brooks' error. Most likely, the Egyptologists simply aren't interested in the correct astronomical dating of the Egyptian zodiacs, because they have known that such dating would blatantly contradict the established Egyptian chronology to which they have adhered ever since the publication of Morozov's works. In certain cases, Egyptologists do identify Venus and Mercury in the zodiacs correctly, the female planetary figure as Venus, and the two-faced male one, as Mercury. However, this only appears to apply to the Egyptian zodiacs which weren't studied by such classics of Egyptology as Brooks. Thus, their interpretation does not present the risk of contradicting the opinion of an eminent figure of authority. In the colored Theban zodiac OU, we have a single candidate that can be identified as Venus, namely, the female figure over the constellation of Leo. Here, planetary figures have no rods. In the Athribis zodiacs, the bird figure representing Venus was identified as a result of computer calculations accounting for all the options. We already discussed the name of Venus in the demotic horoscope from the zodiac of Brooks. In another horoscope from the same zodiac, the horoscope with boats, we can identify Venus instantly. It is the only female planetary figure that we see here. The depiction of Venus in the third horoscope shown in Brooks' zodiac, the horoscope without rods, is very peculiar indeed. Venus was identified only after all other planets had been excluded. The only remaining symbol is the lioness with the tail of a crocodile and a crocodile underneath. However, the crocodile might relate to the symbolism of the Leo constellation, where Venus is located in this case. In the OU zodiac, where Venus is also in Leo, we see a very similar crocodile beneath the constellation figure. The sign of the lioness, usually as a leonine head, often accompanies Venus in the Egyptian zodiacs. For instance, one of the two figures that represent Venus in the primary horoscopes on the zodiacs of Esna and Dendera has the head of a lioness. The fact that the head in question is leonine is illustrated in this picture. Only one figure of those is a woman with a leonine head, the so-called goddess Sekhmet. Images of this goddess were often found in the ancient Egypt. One of such statues is exhibited in the Hermitage, St. Petersburg, a sitting granite human-sized statue of Sekhmet. One plainly sees that Venus, or Sekhmet, has the head of a lioness. Another attribute of Venus, which it has in common with Mercury, is a vertical serpent. We shall discuss this symbol in detail later. Drawings of Mercury from the primary horoscopes of different zodiacs can be seen in this image. The circles of the zodiacs marked EM, EB and OU are shaded gray, which means that Mercury was found as a result of computer calculations with all possible options sorted through. In all the other zodiacs, Mercury was identified instantly. On the DL zodiac, the fast-moving Mercury is shown in the main horoscope in two positions simultaneously, visible and invisible. In the DL cell, all figures located between the two Mercury symbols are scaled down for clarity. Three various drawings of Mercury are given for Brooks' zodiac, one for each of the primary horoscopes contained in this zodiac. In the first one, the name of Mercury is written in demotic script between Scorpio and Libra. It was interpreted as Sebek by Brooks, which stands for Mercury. In the two other horoscopes of Brooks, Mercury is drawn as human figures. As we have already mentioned earlier, Mercury was often drawn as a two-faced male figure in the Egyptian zodiacs. In his analysis of the planets in the round zodiac of Dendera, Morozov writes the following.
We see a wayfarer carrying a rod who looks like the two-faced god Janus with a star over his head. It is the planet Mercury that never leaves the solar vicinity and can only be observed for a few days, showing each of his two faces. The first in the west at dusk and the second in the east at dawn.
This is most noticeably confirmed by the symbolism of zodiac P2. Mercury is drawn as a man with two faces, one of which is turned towards the sun and left unshaded, whereas the second is turned away from the sun and shaded black. The astronomical meaning of these symbols is obvious. The face turned towards the sun is illuminated by the solar rays, whereas the one that faces the other direction remains beyond their reach. Thus, one can say that Mercury shows us the two faces that it has, as it can be observed from both sides of the sun. As for Morozov's guess that the Egyptian Mercury corresponds to the two-faced Roman god Janus, he is perfectly right here. Thus, if we see a two-faced male planetary figure in an Egyptian zodiac, we presume it to stand for Mercury. This rule isn't always of use. In some of the Egyptian zodiacs there are no two-faced planetary figures. In such cases Mercury could be drawn with a single face, usually human, but occasionally also a jackal's head. The authors have discovered that Mercury often possesses the same attributes in different Egyptian zodiacs. They are useful for estimating Mercury's position in complex and ambiguous cases. Among such symbolic attributes we find the following. Bicephalous, are two-faced creatures facing opposite directions. Sometimes their bicephalous nature is replaced by a pair of arms spread wide. These symbols are manifest the most in the greater zodiac of Esna. We see both a two-faced animal and a human figure with arms stretched sideways, with two identical little animals below, drawn as facing each other. Mercury itself is drawn here as two jackal-headed figures, one sitting and the other standing. The sitting figure with the spread arms can be seen next to Mercury in this zodiac. A serpent-shaped rod in the hands of Mercury, or simply a vertical drawing of a snake nearby. May also serve as an attribute of Venus, on the zodiacs of Esna, for instance. Such snakes accompany Mercury the most often in secondary horoscopes, but we also occasionally encounter them in the primary horoscopes. For instance, next to the above-mentioned sitting figure with arms stretched to the side, we see a vertically aligned drawing of a snake. This snake may also be bicephalous, as in the secondary summer solstice horoscope, from the greater zodiac of Esna. Horizontal drawings of snakes appear frequently in Egyptian zodiacs, but they do not serve as symbols of Mercury. Some of them indicate equinox points. Also, even vertical drawings of snakes don't necessarily have to stand for Mercury. For instance, a cobra on a pedestal with a raised head might stand for an equinox point. In some cases, vertically aligned snakes are seen in the vicinity of other planetary symbols, Venus, for instance. However, such cases are rather rare. On the contrary, we see such snakes near Mercury very often. Sometimes they can be used to identify the position of Mercury. Whether or not this theory is veracious can be estimated from calculations. The feather on the head of a figure can often serve as an attribute of Mercury. However, this doesn't necessarily have to be the case. It can stand for Mercury in secondary horoscopes, the summer solstice horoscope in Gemini, for example. The above-mentioned sitting figure with stretched arms that we see in Mercury's entourage has got a feather instead of a head. Mercury moves faster than any other planet except for the Moon. Therefore, Mercury's position could vary to a great extent within the confines of the primary horoscope's date. This would lead to Mercury becoming indicated twice on certain Egyptian zodiacs. We see this to be the case in the long zodiac of Dendera, for instance, for which we saw Mercury in both positions, visible as well as invisible. The date of an Egyptian zodiac as transcribed in a primary horoscope could be stretched into a sequence of several days. The Egyptians might not have indicated the exact hour or even the day of the event to which the given zodiac was dedicated. It is possible that they only knew the week where the event that they're interested in had happened. One still finds traces of the ancient timekeeping method that was based upon weeks counted from Easter in the Orthodox ecclesiastical calendar. The fact that Mercury is drawn twice in the long zodiac of Dendera, once in its visible position, and once invisible, hiding behind the Sun, was pointed out by Morozov. Here, a fragment of the long zodiac of Dendera is shown, in which two depictions of Mercury can be seen. One of them looks like two men, one following another. The one on the left is holding a planetary rod in his hand. Another is holding a snake, and there are two feathers on his head. The visibility of Mercury is symbolized by the star over the head of the man with the rod. Another representation of Mercury can be found on the other side of the figure of Taurus with the Sun over its back. This figure is somewhat smaller. He is like a two-faced man with a human and a falcon face. There is no star over his head, since the planet was invisible in this position, obscured by the Sun. The entire picture of Mercury passing by the Sun corresponds ideally to the real situation as observed on the celestial sphere. In general, on the long zodiac, as on many other zodiacs, the visibility of the planets was carefully depicted. Mercury is also drawn twice in the horoscope with boats, from Brooks' zodiac, where it is represented by two similar male planetary figures in boats that we see on either side of Saturn's figure. Apparently, the underlying concept implied the demonstration of Mercury's visible position as well as the invisible. This happened when a fast Mercury turned up on the other side of the slowly moving Saturn, which is what the second figure of Mercury on the zodiac must stand for.